Hey guys, it's Isaac. I decided to do a banner or sort of a mural situation with the two pieces I chose to do for the rhetorical analysis imitation that we had to submit on Griffin's Our Secret and Long Soldier's 38. I think both Griffin and Long Soldier used imagery and tone in varying ways, with one creating the other in different methods to help get their message across and how they wanted to. So for Griffin's, I kind of noticed that she used a lot more imagery and descriptive words to create the tone of the piece, which is kind of set by the two metaphors I'll get to in a second. And so the images I decided to do were a cell, kind of representing a brain or transitioning into a brain, a Nazi war helmet, a journal, Himmler's dad and Himmler with them talking about his journal or telling Himmler how to do journaling, and then a missile heading towards the city. And so I guess I'll start off with Griffin's two major points throughout the text are represented early on about the missile and the cell, and how Himmler as a child, or just Himmler as an individual, was destined to do what he did. That was her overall message for the text. And so I decided to do draw the cell because it is a major part of the text, but transitioning into a brain to kind of show the permeability of children at that time during Germany. And I guess one of the parts that stood out to me during the text that kind of talks about permeability in a sense is when they're talking about children being chained up to their cribs, and then there were children that were not being able to masturbate at the time, which did kind of set that during the time children were not treated well. They did have very horrific or bland, and it wasn't like the typical childhood that we think of today. And so yeah, that's why I tried to do it in a brain, just to show that it is being analyzed and taken in, and it is going to influence who he is. And then the other metaphor that she uses in the text heavily at the beginning is the imagery of a missile, and some of the facts she states about the missile is that once it's launched, it really can't be stopped, and it can find its target from 3,000 to 4,000 feet away with pretty pinpoint accuracy. So I decided to do the missile in a very small city, again, to represent the amount of destruction that he did commit during his time in the Nazi regime, because it wasn't something on a small scale. Even though he wasn't actively killing and shooting them, he would have been the individual launching the missile, which would have been killing the people, even though he wasn't actually killing them. And then another major part in the text is the journal and Himmler's father teaching him how to journal. And so I just found a couple instances in the text where Griffin does try and represent or recreate how Himmler's writing would have been, which is very bland. There's no descriptive words, which is very against how Griffin decided to write, which I thought was super interesting, why she would choose a child who didn't really have a very descriptive or lively childhood and then write about him in the nature that she did, which brought a lot of life to, I think, what we did know about Himmler before. And then the other image I decided to do was Himmler's father kind of showing him how to journal, which is kind of, he doesn't have any control over what he's writing. He might have the slightest control only in what's being said, but his dad is pretty much dictating how he's going to write it and what's going to actually end up on the page, which creates the tone of, he also didn't have control. Goes back to the missile, kind of ties in with the missile there. And then the last one, just to kind of tie it in as a whole of just who he was and what we know him for now, is just being a Nazi and committing horrific crimes. And then transitioning into Long Soldier's piece, I decided to do the images in black and white because I thought Long Soldier's piece used more tone than imagery to convey her message, because her message is more dark and dreary, and it doesn't need, the words she used convey the message fairly well. I think we can picture in our head, which talks about starving, so I drew individuals starving, and it's pretty grotesque, and if I was a better artist, it would probably look a lot more grotesque and horrific. And then I decided to do a gravestone just to represent starved, because that is their final ending point. I thought starving and starved were two of the most influential words, and kind of just showed that it is state of fact, it is what happened to them. There is no changing what happened, or even during their time period, they couldn't have changed what was happening to them. It was just going to happen. And then another important imagery or tone-setting imagery that I found in the text was the 38 Dakota people being hung, And so I decided to draw two nooses with the number 38 in them. And instead of drawing the actual people or individuals in the noose, I decided to just go with the numbers, just to kind of go with the theme of there really isn't any imagery used. So just doing the numbers and using the nooses are kind of like the central point for that image, just because we know what we can imagine what it would look like with somebody in a noose, and that's what she's trying to get us to do with there. She's not really talking about how they're struggling or choking or their eventual death in it. And then finally, I decided to do the point where they kind of get revenge on a white individual by stuffing his mouth with grass. And even though it doesn't talk about his like final ending point or just like him dying specifically, I think the skull kind of represents like in the future this is what it would kind of look like if they just like left him there, and that's how I imagined when she was trying to write. And I think also her writing in general, the way she spaced everything out, and she didn't really, all of her sentences were pretty short and brief and state of fact, which I thought kind of complemented the image as well, because there really isn't a lot of descriptive into it. It's all based on tone and what she wants you to take from the text. Yeah, so that was this is what I decided to do for my transformation project. Thanks for watching.